In the 1980s, the United States developed a kinetic energy hit-to-kill missile used to destroy satellites in outer space. The missile was hurled towards its target in space from an F-15 Eagle flying around 36,000 feet in the air and traveling at speeds above the speed of sound. This is the story of the events which led up to that project, and just another way the United States proved communism sucks. On 4 October 1957, the Soviets shocked the world when Sputnik 1 was launched into orbit. Sputnik did two things. It showed the United States the Soviets are beating them in the Cold War, and the Soviets had missiles which could reach the United States. This resulted in increased Western fears. The Soviets weren't just some backwoods communist country, but a real world power to fear. You see, after World War II, two superpowers emerged: the Constitutional Federal Republic of the United States and the Constitutional Socialist Republic of the USSR. Being the two biggest kids on the block, fears quickly emerged that someday the two would have to fight, and this fear sparked the Cold War, capitalism versus communism. The US and USSR never fought a formal war directly against each other, but several proxy wars occurred, along with an arms race and a fear of nuclear apocalypse. After its launch, Sputnik started the space race of the Cold War, and the US had to catch up. Although privately, the CIA and President Eisenhower were aware of Soviet progress being made on Sputnik from top-secret imagery provided by the U-2 Dragon Lady, Eisenhower declared in 1958 three stark facts, which were: 1. The Soviets had surpassed America and the rest of the world in scientific and technological advancements in outer space. 2. If the Soviets maintained that superiority, they might use it as a means to undermine America's prestige and leadership. And lastly, if the Soviets became the first to achieve significant superior military capability in outer space and created an imbalance of power, they could pose a direct military threat to the U.S. The U.S. launched Explorer 1 on 31 January 1958, placing the first American satellite into orbit. 1958 also saw the creation of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which was later renamed the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA for short, and the National Aeronautics and Space Act, which formed NASA. Immediately, the U.S. started dumping money into the education system. The Soviets were producing 2 to 3 times the amount of scientists the U.S. was at the time, and America needed to put a greater emphasis on scientific and engineering studies. By the mid-1960s, NASA was providing nearly 10% of federal funds for academic research. The US and USSR would go back and forth in leading the space race for several years. For instance, on 12 April 1961, the Soviets put Yuri Gagarin into orbit, and he became the first human to orbit the Earth. The U.S. countered by placing Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, on 20 July 1969. During the space race, the anti-satellite arms race was also going on full tilt behind closed doors. The U.S. knew the dangers satellites could pose, as they could not only provide surveillance capabilities by reporting positions of U.S. forces, but could also be used to launch weapons. By the 1960s, several programs, such as the Department of Defense SPIN Space Intercept Program and the United States Navy's Satellite Intercept Program, were developing munitions to destroy satellites. The problem was that in the 1960s, computers were not the pocket-sized, high-speed computers we know today, and they were having trouble pinpointing something the size of a Volkswagen Bug hurling itself 17,000 miles per hour and 350 miles above the Earth's surface. To solve this dilemma, nuclear warheads were put on these early satellite interceptors, so they didn't have to be dead on, but more in the ballpark to destroy their targets. However, the U.S. started to fear a nuclear explosion used to destroy a satellite in space could also destroy or damage U.S. satellites as well. Another concept the U.S. anticipated in the 1970s was the development of killer satellites, which could be used to destroy vital U.S. reconnaissance and communication satellites. With these fears quickly multiplying, President Carter directed the U.S. Air Force to develop a non-nuclear anti-satellite rocket in 1978. What they came up with was the Vought ASM-135A anti-satellite missile, or ASAT. It was a hit-to-kill missile with an infrared homing kinetic energy warhead. This meant it had no explosive ordnance in the warhead. Basically, the developers thought something crashing into a satellite at a combined closing speed of about 36,000 feet per second was sufficient to destroy a satellite. To slingshot the 2,600-pound ASM-135 into space, it was mounted centerline on a modified F-15A Eagle. The Eagle was a rocket by itself. Its top speed was Mach 2.5 or 1,650 miles per hour. To prove the F-15 was a rocket, in 1983, an Israeli Air Force F-15 and an A-4 Skyhawk collided into each other mid-air. This resulted in the wing of the F-15 being ripped off. The Skyhawk crew quickly ejected from the aircraft. However, the Eagle driver regained control of the aircraft by kicking on the afterburners, which increased the aircraft's speed and flew the airplane to the nearest landing strip and landed it. Landed a plane with one wing ripped off. But wait, there's more. The F-15 was then rebuilt and put back into service and shot down a MiG-23 on 19 November 1985. That's pretty impressive, but now back to the satellite killing. On 13 September 1985, Major Wilbert Doug Pearson took off in an F-15A and was flying west of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The target was a Solwind P-78 TAC-1 satellite, which was in orbit 345 miles above the Pacific Ocean. At around 12:40 hours, Major Pearson kicked on the afterburners, making that Eagle fly to Mach 1.22 and executed a zoom climb at an angle of 65 degrees. The ASM-135A ASAT automatically released from the F-15 at 38,100 feet and launched itself at the Solwind satellite. The missile quickly locked onto its target and sped out of sight, heading towards the final frontier. When Pearson keyed his mic to receive further instructions regarding the flight, he could hear the cheering from ground control. The ASM-135 ASAT had directly struck its target, and Major Pearson became the first space ace of the United States Air Force. This test sent a message to the USSR and the rest of the world. The only reason they have satellites is because the United States allowed them to. Please like and subscribe. Until next time, Trash Panda Actual, out.